Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Radharanaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Shtatarashata Srimad Goswami Abhai Charan Arvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Shtutarashatashi Srimati Dandi Goswami Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shishingur and Shiguranga. Hare Krishna. So on the order of His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj, with the permission and blessings of His Grace Medavi Prabhu, His Grace Sudhi Prabhu, and His Grace another Prabhupada's disciple who forbade me to mention him in this class. With their permission and with permission all the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, we will read a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, continuing the description of Lord Shiva's abode. This is verse 23, chapter 24, entitled Chanting the Song Sung by Lord Shiva of the fourth canto. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashta Prayesha Badresho Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Tatra Gandharvam Akaranyam Tatra Gandharvam Akaranyam Divya Marga Manoharam Divya Marga Manoharam Visismyo Rajaputraste Visismyo Rajaputraste Mridanga Panavajano Mridanga Panavajano Tatra Gandharvamakarnya Divya Marga Manoharam Visismyo Rajaputraste Mridanga Panavajano. Divya Marga Manoharam Visismyo Mridanga Panavajano. Vaishnavis. Ramakarnya Divya Marga Manoharam Putraste Tragandharvamakarnyam Yamarga Manoharam Vishnu Raja Putraste Vidanga Panavajanu. Word for word. Tatra, there. Gandharvam, musical sounds. Akarnya, hearing. Divya, heavenly. Marga, symmetrical. Manaharam, beautiful. Visismyuhu, they became amazed. Rajaputraha, all the sons of King Barhishat. Te, all of them. Mridanga, drums. Parnava, kettle drums. Adi, all together. Anu, always. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The sons of the king became very much amazed when they heard vibrations from various drums and kettle drums, along with other orderly musical sounds pleasing to the ear. Purport. In addition to the various flowers and living entities about the lake, there were also many musical vibrations, devoid of the impersonalists, which has no variegatedness, is not at all pleasing compared to such a scene. Actually, one has to attain the perfection of Satchitananda, eternity, bliss, and knowledge, because the impersonalists deny these varieties of creation. They cannot actually enjoy transcendental bliss. The place where the Prachetas arrived was the abode of Lord Shiva. Impersonalists are generally worshippers of Lord Shiva, but Lord Shiva is never without variety in his abode. Thus, wherever one goes, whether to the planet of Lord Shiva, Lord Vishnu, or Lord Brahma, there is variety to be enjoyed by persons full in knowledge and bliss. Tatra Gandharam Akarnya Divya Marga Manoharam Visismyu Rajaputraste Mridanga Panavajanu. The sons of the king became very much amazed when they heard vibrations from various drums and kettle drums, along with other orderly musical sounds pleasing to the ear. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksuran Miritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpataro Bhishcha Kripa Sindhubhye Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkri Patamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. So one may wonder what actually constitutes success in speaking on Srimad Bhagavatam, especially in such a learned assembly. And I was fortunate to be in the school of Gopi Paranadana Prabhu, where Mayapur Chandra Prabhu was manager for some time. And Gopi Paranadana Prabhu, well, some of you do know him. He was a great scholar, and he was the one who, along with Hridayananda Maharaj and Dravida Prabhu, completed Srimad Bhagavatam after Prabhupada's departure. He was extremely humble, very knowledgeable. He knew the Shastra by heart, inside out, and he himself wrote commentaries on Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Sandarbhas, and other scriptures. And we were his students, studying under him different intricacies of the Sanskrit grammar. For me, it was just an excuse to be somehow around him in his vicinity. When he first came to Russia in 1993, all of us were completely captivated by his humility, childlike innocence, and knowledge. And whenever he would give a class, he wouldn't quote shlokas that often, but whatever he would speak, he would always somehow communicate the sweetness and profound deepness of the Shastra and Srila Prabhupada's commentaries. And for him, Srila Prabhupada was the ultimate pramana, ultimate evidence. Whenever we would get into some discussions on intricacies of philosophy and was some particular point debated back and forth, when he would hear that Prabhupada had a particular teaching, a particular stance on that particular issue, even though that might have disagreed with some other teachings, that was it for him. He would say, that's it. That's the final say. Nothing to say, nothing to discuss. That was the final truth for him. So he would come to our classes, and you can imagine how embarrassed we were sitting in front of him. And he wouldn't be there in the class just some like juror or a strict teacher who would just mark us down as we were going through the verses and would try to say something, and he would then admonish us for errors and mistakes. No, he was actually, the way he would sit in our class, I can show you, he would lean forward and he would open eyes very wide, and he would even open his mouth a little bit, slightly gape, and he would hear with rapt attention. And I was wondering why he was listening to us mumbling and stumbling in front of him. And once he revealed in his class, he would give a class once in a while, and he gave an explanation. He said, even if somebody speaks nonsense in his class for 1 hour, 20 or 45 minutes, if he or she manages to repeat verbatim a few words from Srila Prabhupada, we should be in ecstasy. That was his explanation. So I could understand what he was looking forward to in our classes, hearing some words from Srila Prabhupada. For him, that was enough justification to see through the rest of it. So we have already read Srila Prabhupada's words, and that was the success part of the class today. But of course, Prabhupada himself gave orders to his disciples sitting in front of him, and you could also imagine how they felt speaking in front of Srila Prabhupada. And he also felt wrapped in attention, listening to their words. And sometimes he would raise his hand and ask questions. Like one disciple in his class said, Krishna is in his holy name. And Prabhupada raised his hand, and he asked, yes, Prabhupada? And he asked, so where exactly is Krishna in his holy name? Which part of the holy name is Krishna in? And the disciple felt at a loss, and he said, I don't know, Prabhupada, maybe you could answer. Prabhupada said, well, Krishna is the holy name. He is not in the holy name. He is the holy name from the beginning till the end, right? So Prabhupada gave orders to his disciples and his followers to discuss regularly his teachings. And the best way to do it is to quote his other statements and elsewhere in the books, because all of his teachings are complete. Prabhupada himself, just like the Damodarashtaka prayer that we chant every morning and every evening for the month of Kartik, was written by Satyavrata Muni, but it's not that he just sat down kind of pensively thinking what novel poem should I write about Lord Damodar, and in his creative poetic inspiration wrote something. No, he meditated for a long time, and he performed austerities, and he is known as the Rishi or Mantra Drashta. The Rishis are those who relay the spiritual reality to us as it is. They can see it in their spiritual vision, and they communicate it to us in an understandable fashion. In the Rig Veda mantra it says, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashyanti Surayaha Diviva Chakshuratatam. The Suris, or Surayas in the plural, they are the ones who see the spiritual world, and then they find proper words, even though it's very difficult to find proper words. to describe what they see. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself, as he said on his admission, found himself in a predicament trying to communicate with the limited vocabulary that he thought he had was thousands of words. The words that he used in English, and I cannot even imagine the kind of vocabulary he had in Bengali, Hindi, and Sanskrit. But even his English is something that we have to use a dictionary for and understand the words he used. Like once Ravindra Saruprabhu said in his class in Mayapur, that as a scholar, Ravindra Saruprabhu, a PhD in philosophy, a brilliant thinker, and his English requires a dictionary sometimes, at least for me, to understand what he speaks about or writes about. And he was wading through a piece of lecture, transcribed lecture by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he got stuck on one passage and he couldn't get past it. He couldn't understand it. And he, as he said, he went on and on trying to reread it and figure out what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur meant by that. And all of a sudden, when it occurred on him what the meaning was, he also understood that he already heard it because Prabhupada explained it to us in simple words, the same concept. So Satyavrata Muni, he was meditating for many thousands of years, and then that entire Damodarashtakam came to his mind and his purified heart. And then he wrote it down for us, or communicated in some other way in Padma Purana. In the same way, Srila Prabhupada's commentaries are not something that he created out of his whatever, being very well versed or informed and logical, and which he was, but as he himself said, these are directly communicated to him by Krishna, and he wrote down so we could also see Krishna face to face in the pages of his Srimad Bhagavatam. He writes about it in his own words in the third chapter, the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, when he says, actually I want to read it, because I don't want to misquote Prabhupada. I want to read him verbatim. Prabhupada says, interestingly, because these words were written when? The first canto, third chapter, probably even way before he went to the West. It was somewhere in Radha Damodar, I guess. Maybe he was not definitely dictating, he was typing it on his typewriter. Is it correct that he was using just two fingers? He wasn't a touch typist when he was typing. I was told Prabhupada typed all of his commentaries before he switched over to dictation by using two fingers, which you can imagine takes about 5 times more time than using 10 fingers for a touch typist. So he was typing this commentary on his typewriter, and he says, one can certainly see directly the presence of Lord Shri Krishna in the pages of the Bhagavatam if one has heard it from a self-realized great soul like Shukadeva Goswami. That is the secret of learning the Bhagavatam. Nor can one learn the Bhagavatam from one who interprets the text by his mundane scholarship. One has to learn the Bhagavatam from the representative of Shukadeva Goswami, no one else. And then Prabhupada continues, simply hearing is not all. One must realize the text with proper attention. And then he continues, well, it's a wonderful commentary. I want to read it all, but I'll leave it to some other time. So Prabhupada's commentaries are just that. He allows us to see Krishna face to face in the pages if we give rapt attention to his words written down on the pages. So this description of the lake and the surroundings of Lord Shiva's abode also creates a very proper setting for Lord Shiva's appearance. In the next verses 24 and 25, Lord Shiva emerges and Prachetas are mesmerized at his beautiful appearance. He's described in the next verses as having bodily luster like molten gold, with bluish throat and 3 eyes, and he looked very merciful upon his devotees. So these verses from the 20th till the 23rd describe the setting. First it was the lake with aquatics, which is quiet and placid, just like the minds of great soul, and then inhabitants were very peaceful and happy. Then we move a little bit further away from the lake, from its depth, and see the bluish and reddish lotuses covering its surface and the water birds. Then we move on to the shore and see the surroundings, various trees, in bumblebees and birds, and the trees appear to be very jolly. Yesterday, His Holiness Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj remarked on the jolly trees, which is, I think they look the same, whether they're jolly or distressed. You cannot even tell the difference, at least in the mundane world. If you do express their emotions, it's so slow, by the time you notice it, it's already too late. Like something caused them distress and they show it somehow, then it's too late for us to register it and correct the situation. But in the spiritual world, and Lord Shiva's abode is also, you could say, half spiritual, because Lord Shiva, as Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj himself explained, he is like the Lord himself, but also with a certain peculiarity, a certain specialty. Lord Shiva extends his presence from the spiritual world, where he is known as Sadashiva, to this world to be the last hope, the last refuge for those who have no hope and no place to go. That's why he's known as especially favorable to beings, not even people, but beings who are quite useless for all intents and purposes for spiritual life, like ghosts, and Prabhupada called them hobgoblins or something like that in one of his purports. So Lord Shiva, as the master of false ego, the energy that keeps everyone captivated and illusioned in the material world, he can also administer liberation to the residents of this world. In his capacity as a Vaishnava, he can and does grant benedictions to devotees, and he is very happy, as he will himself admit. He'll tell the Prachetas. Actually, he says in verse 28, any person who is surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, the controller of everything, material nature as well as the living entity, is actually very dear to me. And he goes on to explain how pleased he is by the Prachetas. But Lord Shiva, of course, is a great Vaishnava. He also has a very prominent feature in him. The greater a devotee becomes, the more he or she feels and behaves humbly. He doesn't assume any special position. He doesn't admit that he has any special devotion. And in fact, he honestly believes that he has no mercy of Krishna, doesn't render any service to him, and has no love for him. When Narada Muni comes to Shiva Loka in Brihad Bhagavatamrita and starts glorifying Lord Shiva as the greatest of all Vaishnavas, which he is. He is Vaishnavanam Yatha Shambhuhu. He is the greatest of all Vaishnavas in this world. And Lord Shiva, angrily and in an embarrassed state of mind, he covers his ears. Actually, he blocked his mouth, I think, Narada Muni later on. But he says, Najato Jagadisho Ham Napi Krishna Kripaspadam Param Tat Dasa Dasanam Sadanugraha Kamukaha. He says, I'm no Vaishnava. Najato Jagadisho Ham. I'm not the controller of this world. I'm not a Vaishnava because Vaishnavas are free from false ego. But I'm the root cause of the universal false ego. It comes from me. And Napi Krishna Kripaspadam, I haven't received any drop of mercy of the Lord. Paramta Dasa Dasanam Sadanugraha Kamukaha. All I have to aspire for is to get some drop of mercy of Krishna's devotees. So Lord Shiva emerges from this scene, beautiful setting, and he will give instructions to Prachetas, being pleased by their faithfulness to the instructions of their spiritual master. And this is how Srila Prabhupada himself explains the key to success in spiritual life. Just like the Prachetas pleased their spiritual master even without having yet performed their austerities, but by their determination and faithfulness to the instructions of the spiritual master, they pleased him and also pleased the Lord Shiva. Srila Prabhupada explains again in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I wonder if it's here. Yeah, probably, yeah, later towards the end of this canto, chapter 28, verse 51 or 52, I think it is. When Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport that the determination to stick, and he uses that word, stick to the instructions of the spiritual master, is tantamount, means completely equal for all intents and purposes to being able to see the Lord face to face. There is no difference. These are just two different ways of expressing the same state of mind. If somebody is strictly following the instructions of the spiritual master, he or she are already in the presence of the of the Supreme Lord. Whatever they could attain by seeing the Lord face to face is attained by them by faithfully and intelligently, and Prabhupada also emphasized that intelligence is also required in following the instructions of the spiritual master, by following the instructions of their guru. Yes, Srila Prabhupada says that in chapter 29 actually. Anyhow. So Lord Shiva emerges, and now everything makes perfect sense, because the lake and the aquatics and the birds and the trees and the sounds that the Prachetas are now hearing, they create a proper setting to Lord Shiva's appearance. In our case, seem to develop in reverse. It's not that we first see the abode of the Lord or the beautiful scenery that is there. Prabhupada in his commentary explains that whether it's Lord Shiva's abode, Lord Vishnu abode, Lord Brahma abode, they're full of variety and they're enjoyed by persons full of knowledge, full in knowledge and bliss. And then the last thing they remark on or they notice is the sound. But in our case, our spiritual life develops in reverse, usually. First we hear the sound. From the sound of the holy name, the sound of the spiritual master, the sound of kirtan. I know one devotee, a very nice devotee. Actually, he's the son of one very prominent, highly placed official in the Russian government. I won't even mention who his father is. But he was born in a very opulent and well-off family. How do you say that in English? With a silver spoon in his mouth? Something like that. And as a teenager, that was in 1990-something, 96 or 97, we had a radio station in Moscow called Radio Krishna Loka. That radio station would broadcast 24 hours a day, 24/7, discourses, kirtans, lectures, and sometimes even live shows when people would call in and ask questions. And one of the hosts in the live show was Bhaktivigyan Maharaj. At that time he was known as Vaidyanatha Prabhu, extremely knowledgeable and very articulate and very spiritually potent person back then, and still, of course, even more so. So he would sometimes give live shows. And this devotee who I'm talking about, at that time a teenager, very educated. He was educated in the West, I think in Oxford and some other university in America, and he was just browsing out of curiosity the radio waves, and he stumbled upon someone's live show, and somebody was answering questions. He didn't know what these questions were, he didn't know half of the terms used, but somehow he was completely mesmerized and captivated by the sound of the voice of that person. He didn't know who the person was, but it so deeply struck him with its clarity and purity and some kind of another dimension, the kind of dimension that we feel when we hear devotees for the first time. I remember when I heard the kirtan for the first time, somehow it evoked in me a sense of nostalgia, almost like yearning to go back to where I didn't know anything about the place, but somehow that feeling, that emotion, that I want to go there, wherever that sound is coming from, came. So that devotee somehow couldn't get rid of that sense of attraction. And he kept on searching for that person. And finally he found Bhaktivigyan Maharaj about 6 or 7 years later and took initiation from him like that. So our spiritual life starts with the sound. Srila Rupa Goswami explains in his commentaries on his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he explains the potency of 5 most powerful, most potent ways of serving Krishna, forms of devotional service. And when he mentions kirtan, he creates his own verses describing the potency of these ways of serving Krishna. And he creates a kirtan, when he describes kirtan, he says, speaking on behalf of a person who was busy going down the road, maybe somewhere here in Durban, to his or her work, and then all of a sudden he came across some person chanting the holy name with his eyes full of tears and arms raised. And then he says, ever since I lost all interest in my material life, and I want to be like him, like that devotee. I'm just freely paraphrasing. So the same way, Srila Prabhupada gave his disciples and his followers that potency, that empowerment to continue his mission. Sometimes devotees feel a little bit shy to even think that they could come on par with Srila Prabhupada in terms of being able to influence people and attract them to spiritual life. And that's a proper feeling. Everyone should feel shy and incapable in the presence of one's spiritual master, or being incapable of fulfilling his mission. But Srila Prabhupada writes in I think it's in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, he says, if a devotee has faith in the holy name, that the holy name is not different from Krishna, and he or she has faith in worshiping the deities, then he becomes a pure devotee. He's still a neophyte, but he's a pure devotee. And the proof that he or she are pure devotees, he later on explains in the commentaries, that by association with them, others can also become devotees. So that's the potency invested in Prabhupada's instructions. If anyone tries to follow them, even if he or she is very new to devotional service, to spiritual life, sometimes they might not even follow all the principles strictly yet. But because of their association, others also become inspired to follow the path of Krishna consciousness. So Lord Shiva emerges here for the Prachetas to see, in the same way as Prabhupada explains, and if we give oral reception to his words and the words of the Guru Parampara, eventually Krishna becomes interested in seeing us and comes and reveals his darshan to us. This is the perfection of spiritual aspirations. Srila Jiva Goswami explains that this is sakshatkar, the ability to see Krishna personally face to face, is the ultimate perfection in spiritual life. But there is something more higher than that. Prabhupada explains, quoting his spiritual master, that if someone serves Krishna with sincerity and purity and dedication to his or her spiritual master, then Krishna becomes eager to see them. And by feeling Krishna's presence in the heart of a devotee transforms into Vrindavan, into spiritual abode of its own. Srila Prabhupada gives a very important, I think it's one of the most important, if I may, so it's probably very presumptuous of me to mark Prabhupada's commentaries as the most important. All of them are important, but it's very relevant for us. Prabhupada writes in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, again, somewhere here, that was in the previous volume. He speaks about the saffron particles. Yesterday we read how the lake was beautified by lotuses, and the wind blew across the surface of the lake, and it carried the aroma of lotuses. In the same fashion, Prithu Maharaj in the 4th canto of Bhagavatam, 20th chapter, verse 25, he says that my only aspiration is to hear to the words of the pure devotees whose sound vibration carries and he uses that word, saffron particles of Krishna's lotus feet, because Krishna is always situated on their hearts. The hearts are compared to lotuses. And there is some, pollination going on. I don't know about you, but I'm allergic to pollen. Whenever I get into a foreign flora, like New Govardhan, I would always get allergy, hay fever, because of the pollen. But this is a different kind of pollen that doesn't create allergies. Actually, the transcendental pollen, saffron particles that are carried by the sound vibration of Krishna's pure devotees, they enter our system not through the nose, but through the ears. And by some unknown to human biology channels, they go from the ear to the heart. And there they pollinate the heart, just like any plant needs to be pollinated to bear fruit. In the same way, our spiritual life bears fruit when it's pollinated by the sound vibration of Krishna's pure devotees, because they carry the saffron particles of Krishna's lotus feet. And then Srila Prabhupada says something very important. Just a second. I wanted to read that. Actually, it's one of the purpose somehow I always find relevant for any discussion. And I don't feel it's being overused by being quoted over and over again, because Prabhupada explains in this purport the most important principle of spiritual life. He says, Well, the verse says, "My dear Lord, you are glorified by the selected verses uttered by great personalities. Such glorification of your lotus feet is just like saffron particles. When the transcendental vibration from the mouths of great devotees carries the aroma of the saffron dust from your lotus feet, the forgetful living entity gradually remembers his eternal relationship with you. Devotees thus gradually come to the right conclusion about the value of life. My dear Lord, I therefore do not need any other benediction but the opportunity to hear from the mouth of your pure devotee." I won't read the entire purport, but I'll just read one passage from here. Prabhupada says, as expressed in a song by Thakur Bhaktivinoda, Lord Chaitanya says, Jiv Jaga, Gaurachandra Boli. Medavi Prabhu in his class quoted that actually he sang that bhajan, Jiv Jaga, Gaurachandra Boli. The Lord asks every sleeping living entity to get up and engage in devotional service. And again, a dear servant of Srila Prabhupada who forbade me to mention his name in his class 2 days ago, 3 days ago, he spoke about sleeping and how we wake up. Prabhupada explains, we wake up, Lord Chaitanya wakes up, asks every sleeping living entity to wake up and engage in devotional service so that his mission in this human life may be fulfilled. But then Prabhupada says extremely consequential words. He says, this awakening voice comes through the mouth of a pure devotee. This is our alarm clock to spiritual reality. This is the alarm. It goes off. Sometimes we try to put it on snooze. At least I do a couple of times in the morning. But the spiritual master, the pure devotee, waking us up to spiritual reality doesn't want to be snoozed by us. He actively breaks into our life and shakes us out of our ignorance and complacency. There are two types of ignorance. One of them is material ignorance, and somehow it's easier to wake someone up from the ignorance of material life, but spiritual complacency is harder because one already lulls himself or herself into the conviction that they know everything, they do everything nicely, everything is nice in their spiritual life, and then a spiritual master comes, wakes him up to reality out of his complacency. And Prabhupada continues, a pure devotee always engages in the service of the Lord, taking shelter of his lotus feet, and therefore he has a direct connection with the saffron mercy. Prabhupada says, it's an interesting how Prabhupada has that ability, that poetic knack, poetic quality of creating new terms which convey the meaning that we haven't heard before. He says, the saffron mercy dash particles, the particles of mercy, saffron color that are strewn over the lotus feet of the Lord. Although when a pure devotee speaks, the articulation of his voice may resemble the sound of the material sky, the voice is spiritually very powerful because it touches the particles of saffron dust on the lotus feet of the Lord. As soon as the sleeping entity hears the powerful voice emanating from the mouth of a pure devotee, he immediately remembers his eternal relationship with Krishna, although up until that moment he had forgotten everything. So now the question comes, what exactly, when does pure devotee speak Krishna Katha? When are saffron particles emanating from his mouth? There was a joke about lawyers. Maybe it's not applicable to South Africa, but in other countries the joke probably is applicable. They say, how do you know that a lawyer is lying? Or a politician, actually. It was a politician. Again, it doesn't apply to South Africa. But how do you know a politician is lying? And the answer is, his lips are moving. That's a joke. So, if you apply it to spiritual matters, how do you know a pure devotee speaks Krishna Katha? The same answer. His lips are moving. Sometimes not even that. Like I heard from Devamrita Swami, the only words Prabhupada spoke to him weren't even words. It was just a sound. When he was busy typing, was it an index for his Chaitanya Charitamrita during that famous marathon of Chaitanya Charitamrita and the Devamrita Prabhu back then, Brahmachari, educated, I think he was educated in Yale's University, and right, and he was there sitting, and Rameshwar was taking Srila Prabhupada, Rameshwar Swami was taking him around the headquarters of BBT where devotees were busy working on his Chaitanya Charitamrita, and then they came upon the cubicle where Devamrita Prabhu was working on a typewriter, indexing Prabhupada's books. If I get it right, but That's the kind of along these lines. And Rameshwara Maharaj told Srila Prabhupada, so here is Devamrita, he's working on index. And Prabhupada nodded his head and he said, And that was it. That was it. That's the only word, the only sound that he ever heard in his life. And he, many times in his classes, he said that this was the most consequential sound that he ever heard in his life. Because it communicates, again, the saffron particles, the pleasure of the spiritual master. So Prabhupada explains here it's very important to hear the mouth of a pure, from the mouth of a pure devotee who is fully surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord. And that's how he can wake up to his or her real life in the spiritual world. And also we heard a few days ago in a class of a devotee who I won't mention by his name, that Prabhupada, he was asked in the class if Prabhupada was treating anyone specially, had any special preference or special treatment for someone. And the answer was that Prabhupada treated everyone specially. But the specialty of Prabhupada treatment goes beyond the immediate circle of his disciples who he could reach out to. Even those devotees who haven't been in contact with Srila Prabhupada, and some of Prabhupada's disciples didn't even see him in person, from what I know. Some of them became initiated by post or by a tape, second initiated. Some of them joined the movement and received initiation when Prabhupada was already quite ill, and they were initiated by his representatives. But all of them felt Prabhupada's personal touch. I remember in his class, and again, that passage in the class really taken me by surprise and by deep appreciation of Prabhupada's mercy and compassion. It was in Melbourne, and towards the end of the class, Prabhupada asked for questions, and some devotees raised their hands, and he picked on someone. And the devotee who asked his question, his name was Misha. He was of a Russian background, but immigrated to Australia. And he asked the question, Prabhupada, about some of his disciples. I won't dwell on his question and Prabhupada's answer, but his sister was also there in the audience. And her name was Tanya, also another Russian name. And she asked Prabhupada, Swamiji, or Prabhupada, why didn't you come earlier? Why didn't you come earlier to the Western world if Krishna consciousness is so urgent, so indispensable and important? Why didn't you come earlier? Of course, Prabhupada could have answered in so many ways. Sometimes when he was asked this question, he said, well, it was a big task, I need to prepare. I received the order in 1922 in that famous place, 1 Ultadanga Road. How many of you have been there to that place? Ultadanga Road, one where Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur met for the first time. You were there? What a wonderful place, huh? It just reminds you of that Lord Shiva's abode, because there you see jolly trees and chirping birds and humming bees and lotuses. When devotees came upon that place, it was in a completely dilapidated condition. Actually, all that was left of the building was the walls. And the roof was almost entirely collapsed, just patches of the roof here and there. And the place where Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was caving in, and devotees had to disassemble the roof and collect and carefully preserve the bricks that had Prabhupada's and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's lotus feet on them. They put them in bags and then they assembled them again into the roof. What really struck devotees when they came upon that place, they acquired it, was that the roof, whatever was left of it, was covered in tulsi plants. There was no earth, no soil, no fertilizers. It was just bare cement and pieces of bricks here and there. And the entire roof was overgrown with tulsis. I don't know how they grew. There was nothing to grow on, or nothing to grow your roots into. It was bare cement, and the trees, I saw it personally myself. When I came there, they had already removed the tulsis once, and they sprouted back up again. And they removed them again, put in pots so they could be replanted, and they grew up again. And I was there, it was 2020-something, my host, Radharaman Prabhu of ISKCON Calcutta, he told me, look, there's another tulsi. And I saw for myself, a very robust-looking, kind of healthy-looking tulsi, with all our fertilizers and lamps and greenhouses and this and that. We cannot achieve the kind of health that tulsi manifested on a bare surface No rains for 3 months, he told me. And she was growing very healthily because that's a spiritual abode. So that place where Prabhupada received that instruction is very, pivotal for the whole world, and the special mercy of the Lord came through the mouth of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur onto Srila Prabhupada and through him to us. So Prabhupada could have answered that question by the lady, why didn't you come earlier? In so many ways. It was a big task, I need to prepare. He was busy working on his Bhagavatam purports. It took 43 years for him to eventually go to the West. But the way he answered the question, I thought, was a very good illustration of what Prabhuji was mentioning in his class. Prabhupada treated everyone specially, in a very special manner. He said, I didn't come early because at that time you were not born yet. I was waiting for your birth. That's what I can show you. I can share with you the recording. Because you were not born yet. I was waiting for your birth. Now that you're born, I came to take you back to the spiritual world. Join us. That's how. So Lord Shiva, as Srila Prabhupada, they're very personal. And they like to recognize and service and efforts in a very profound way, much more than we deserve. Somehow it comes incomparable to the amount of service we render, the amount of mercy we get in Srila Prabhupada's purports and his lectures, his temples and communities and mission and service, and his direct disciples who are still fortunate to have in this world is incomparable with the service we do. So it just takes an effort, not just an effort, but the determination. The determination itself to stick to the instruction of the spiritual master is tantamount to seeing the Lord face to face, and it will take a very short time. How Bhagavatam says, Shrinvata Shradaya Nityam Grinataschya Svacheshchitam Kalena Nati Dirgina Bhagavan Vishate Hridi. In the second canto of the Bhagavatam, Shukadeva Goswami says, Shradaya, with faith, listening, hearing to the Bhagavatam, with faith, Shradaya, Shrinvata Shradaya, Nityam means regularly, Grinataschya Svacheshchitam, trying to understand and grasp the meaning and the import of the verses and the commentaries of Srila Prabhupada, not necessarily on the informational level, but on the intentional level, what Prabhupada really wanted us to be. Not what he wants us to remember, even though he also wants us to remember verses and points and arguments, but Prabhupada communicates through his words what he wants us to be. And that effort by itself, Kalena Nati Dirgina Bhagavan Vishate Hridi, inspires Krishna to enter our heart, and the Bhagavatam says it won't take long. Na Ati Dirgina means it's not going to be too long, much shorter than we deserve. Right? Prabhupada himself has that. He has said many times, apparently disagreeing with so much for, how would they say that? Like spiritual master or spiritual devotee is supposed to agree with Krishna in everything, but Prabhupada appears to argue with Krishna, sometimes even canceling his own words in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, Bahunam janmanam ante gyanavanmam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. A famous verse. Krishna says, Bahunam janmanam ante at the end of many, many births. Gyanavanmam prapadyate, one who understands me in truth. Vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. Very rarely such a great soul is to be found. And then how does Prabhupada comment on this verse? He says, no, it's not rare. It doesn't take many births. How many minutes does it take? Just a few minutes. Not many births. Doesn't take anything. All he has to do is just take a little prasadam. And he gets the understanding that Krishna is everything, at least in the form of prasadam. I don't know about you again, but I was a student when I was nurtured by devotees to spiritual life by prasadam mostly. And students are very hungry most of the time. So that was my most understandable way of accepting Krishna as everything for me, through prasadam. And then Samahatma Sudurlabha, such a great soul is very rare. Prabhupada says, no, we make these Mahatmas very cheaply. That was his word. Easily. All of them are Mahatmas. So this is the power of pure devotees of Krishna and the power of pure devotees of Srila Prabhupada. They have inherited from him this ability to also make us and keep us devotees by communicating to us the transcendental sound vibration which inspires the prachetas now before Lord Shiva appears, and then we'll hear from Lord Shiva the glories of Krishna and the instructions for prachetas to become completely perfect in their spiritual lives. I'll stop here. I have veered off what I wanted to say, but hopefully not too far.
I was so glad you accented that point about the importance.
Me or is it you? Is it your microphone? I see.
I'm sure it's my fault, but the importance of approaching the pure devotee, the Tattva Darshan. You know, some people think that it's important to be born in India or what family, but you don't notice Krishna mentioning this in Bhagavad Gita, but he mentions the Tattva Darshans and approaching them, that's the important matter. And I find out this in life. Like people ask, I was able to do things when I was here alone as a child. Well, I wasn't. But Prabhupada wrote that I am praying to Krishna that you'll have the strength and enthusiasm to carry it out. And that did it. Even though I wasn't capable, the pure devotee can give us the knowledge. And that's more important than what family you think is important to be born in.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kshudri Prabhu. Maharaj, by all means, when I'm supposed to stop? When am I supposed to stop? When?
Lunch is about, whatever time. Should finish by then, probably. But, Lord Shiva and his delivering the ghosts and goblins and hobgoblins and ghouls. These are all sort of European versions of that type of hellish person. He has many names, Lord Shiva, of course. Nilakanta, Ashutosh, these are names of Lord Shiva, and there are many more. But one of his names is Patita Pavan. It's one of his names, because, like that. And then about the jolly trees, I was thinking about it. Unfortunately, it didn't come to me while I was, talking yesterday, but it came to me in the meantime, is that when Srila Rupa Goswami was living at Tirkadamba, he was writing, and there were Kadamba trees there and other trees, flowering trees. So when he would be writing something about Radha and Krishna being separated, then, let's say about Radha and Krishna meeting first, the trees would just burst into flower on the spot. And then when he'd be writing something about them being separated, all the flowers would fall off. That's somewhere in Bhakti Ratnakara, the description of him
thank you so
at
much.
Tirkadamba.
Thank you so much for this illustration of your own question yesterday about jolly trees. And if I may add, along the same lines, is that in the 10th canto of Bhagavatam, of course, when Krishna goes to the forest of Vrindavan, first him and his friends, they have to behave in a very orderly and kind of well-behaved fashion for the mothers to be peaceful. And the Mother Yashoda adjusts his turban and his clothes and gives him a lunch bag, and then tries under different pretexts to follow him all the way to Vrindavan, to the forest of Vrindavan, because she doesn't want to let him. Mothers are always worried about what might happen to their children, even if a child is 53 years old. My mother always asks me. So she's trying to, under different pretexts, to follow him, and then somehow rather they manage to convince her to stay. And what really works, the only thing that works, is to tell her, you're too old to go with us. And to that, she cannot say anything, because she is too old for them to have her around. And then they march properly, and then as soon as Mother Yashoda cannot see them any longer, they break into a sprint. And then everything, throwing caution to the wind. And they start sprinting towards Krishna. And Krishna, It's explained in the Bhagavatam, the 12th chapter of the Bhagavatam, 12th chapter of the 10th canto. How does it go? Yadi duram gatah Krishna vana sobekshane tam. Aham purvam iti sansprishya remere. Krishna feels inspired by the beauty of the forest of Vrindavana and by the anticipation of the forest. The forest of Vrindavana anticipates Krishna and cannot wait to get Krishna into his, into the forest's midst. So Krishna breaks into a sprint because he also cannot tolerate separation from the forest of Vrindavan. Everyone else starts chasing him, shouting, Aham Purvam, I'm going to touch Krishna first. No, I'm going to touch Krishna first. But then it explains that the forest of Vrindavan, in its anticipation of Krishna's arrival, makes all the arrangements, and the trees, in their jolliness, they start oozing honey, they again burst into flowers, and they start bowing down to Krishna's feet as they walk in. And also not only that, but as they walk through the forest, the trees of Vrindavan, they intertwine their branches above Krishna to form a canopy, so that Krishna doesn't feel the scorching heat. Of course, the sun is not scorching in Vrindavan, but somehow they have to find some excuse to serve Krishna, so they form that canopy, moving canopy above him. As he moves about, the canopy of branches moves about him, much to the chagrin of the sun, because the sun cannot see Krishna now, blocked by the trees. And then Krishna starts glorifying the trees, saying, Etavan Janma Sapalyam, Prabhupada quoted that verse oftentimes. Look at the trees. They have attained perfection in life because they use everything they have for the service of others. Their leaves, flowers, fruits, bark, wood, and everything. Even after they're chopped down, their ashes serve some useful purpose in the household affairs. So, yes, they're jolly, and they bow down to Krishna's feet, but then Krishna, in a very genuine fashion, trying to glorify Balaram, tells Balaram, look, he deflects that worship by the trees to Balaram's feet and says, look, Balaram, they seem to be worshipping you, the trees, because they're walking together. Of course, you cannot really tell who the trees are worshipping, but Krishna says this to Balaram, because Balaram is the one who fills up the forest of Vrindavan with their desire and facilities to serve Krishna. So the trees do have a very important function, but according to the Vrindavan script, they are stationary. They cannot run as they would probably want, but they have to stay in one place and wait for Krishna to arrive. But one of those trees, the wish-fulfilling desire trees of Vrindavan, came, at least according to the descriptions, to the what they call cast in movies, when they have who plays which role, and we have that spiritual cast for Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, and Madhavendra Puri, according to Gaura Ganadesha Deepika, is the desire tree. And he comes here, and all of a sudden from him erupts the most intense mood of separation from Krishna. So it's also an example of how the trees can serve in a very unique fashion in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. Sorry, Maharaj.
Well, those trees, when Krishna is, moving around there, they understand Krishna. Now, Krishna wants to sit, so the tree sort of bends one of its branches so Krishna just sit nicely. And Krishna thinks, wow, I'd like a mango. And it may be any tree, but then it produces a mango or two for Krishna. Or Krishna thinks, I'd like some other fruit. Then there it is, because they're wish-fulfilling trees. And Rupa Goswami, he was so much in not always, but sometimes, in the fire of separation. He would breathe on another devotee, and the devotee's skin would blister. It's, from the fire. He was actually in the fire. Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, if you can let me know if you need to stop now, because I don't want to go over time, but I also cannot break your order to speak, so whenever you give me the order to stop, then I'll stop.
Prabhu, you mentioned when Srila Prabhupada visited Australia about the brother and the sister. You mentioned the sister's question, but what was
The brother's
question?
I knew it was going to intrigue someone in the audience. Like there was a joke, I know how to intrigue people, and how? I'll tell you later. So, yeah, actually I met the devotee. His name was Misha back then, but then he got initiated not by Prabhupada, but he saw Prabhupada personally. His name is Madhukanta Prabhu of the New Govardhan community. Oh, he lives in Brisbane with his sister and his family. And the question it's quite interesting actually. It's a good episode for another class, because he asked the question, Prabhupada, some of your disciples, they've received first initiation, second initiation, but then they go off on a tangent and they stop following the principles, and then they fall down, and then they come back to ISKCON and they expect to be respected as they used to be before. Shouldn't they be chastised? Shouldn't they be chastened? Shouldn't they disciplined? I don't remember exactly the words he used, but kind of along those lines. Should we make them humble and make them do some humble service so they could be reinstated? And he wanted to continue his train of thought when Prabhupada cuts him off. And he says, it's in the recording, he says, it's not for you to decide. He has his spiritual master, he will decide what he needs to do. And he tries to continue, but, and he says, not for you to decide. It's not your jurisdiction. That's the word Prabhupada used. And he says, can you give an example? And he says, yes, I can give an example. Prabhupada says, just like the police. The police may chase criminals and may capture one criminal, but they cannot adjudicate his case. They have to bring him to the court of law. And the court of law will decide whether he's a criminal. They'll review all the evidence, all the facts surrounding his case, and then they'll mete out their decision to the person. And before they do so, he cannot be considered the criminal. And punishing him, like the police, if they take justice in their own hands, they become criminals themselves. So Prabhupada tells him, it's not for you to decide. Mind your own affairs, in other words. Because that devotee, Misha, he had been around these devotees for long enough, about 4 years by then. And then he saw probably a few occurrences of what he was referring to. And he says, it's not for you to decide. He has a spiritual master, he will decide. You mind your own business. Right? That's what Prabhupada said.
Thank you.
Should we stop here, Maharaj? Any other comments? Maybe you would like to add something, because I'm sure you have that, plethora of Prabhupada's anecdotes. And thank you very much for your kind attention. Please forgive me if anything that has been said wasn't up to your liking, and I will be very much happy and open to corrections. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaura Premanande.